IKIM Inspirasi Inforia Islami. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Welcome to our fellow listeners who are tuning into IKIM radio and to our program this evening, Open Forum. So inshallah for this particular episode, we will be talking about one current issue which is I think very important, and it has been mentioned by our Honorable Prime Minister about tackling Islamophobia as well. And I think we have a very special guest and who is very much experienced and who can deliver this particular topic from his point of view. We have with us Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady. Welcome to the program, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having, for coming over to our program, inshallah, Open Forum. So Dr. Ahmad is currently an assistant professor at ISTAC-IIUM, and Dr. Ahmad is also an associate fellow with ICCT in The Hague, and he has worked closely with the Malaysian government in terrorist rehabilitation and de-radicalization program. And also, I believe Dr. Ahmad is also a resource person for the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program, or ICTAP, in the United States. You have a lot of experience with regard to the efforts in countering terrorism, extremism, and also I think you have talked about many times about the topic that we are going to deliver today, inshallah, understanding Islamophobia in the West. As an introduction to our program, Doctor, we know that currently, or in the recent weeks, the recent months, episodes of Islamophobia, especially in Western countries, and it's evident in Europe. There are countries where we can see certain actions which signal or which shows that there is a concern level of Islamophobia among people in the West, and this concern or this particular episodes raise an alarm of the need for us to actually tackle Islamophobia. So maybe you can share with us, Doctor, as an introduction with our listeners about, we've seen in news about the Quran burning and also the desecration of the Quran. So maybe if you can share a bit about this particular issue, Doctor, as an introduction to our discussion this evening.
Thank you very much, Annie, for the introduction. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate IKIM for taking over this issue and discuss this and try to take over this issue and try to discuss this is a very in-depth manner, and try to look at it from various point of view and try to present a very right perspective on how we can see this issue very well. When we speak about Islamophobia, I was thinking about it for quite some time since my involvement with the counterterrorism works. I noticed that there is a few things that we can learn from the experience of having this issue. Number one, it is not a new issue. When we look at the history, we can see the issue of Islamophobia, meaning that an unfounded fear or prejudice, a bias toward Islam, toward Muslim, toward anything related with Islam, it's not a new thing. It's happened during the time of the Prophet. It's happened also during the time of the Sahaba and continues to be existed since then. And even in the modern times, we also can see similar phenomenon happen. So definitely, therefore, we can conclude that it is not a new phenomenon, but it has been evolved from time to time. And I believe that it would be there. It would be there until the end of times. So that is number one. Number two, the existence or the presence of Islamophobia is because of combination between perception and half-truth. There are one is perception, the certain perception or misperception, I would say, that people have about Islam, about Muslim, based on their readings, based on their understanding, and based on their interpretation. And the other component is they also see some kind of bad things that associated with Islam. For example, the existence of the extremist group or the terrorist group that exists in the Muslim world and also in their countries, and then anything which is related with Islam. There are some people who engage with violence. There are some people engage with extremism, and therefore, actually, that perception solidify their perception that Islam is actually a kind of bad religion, violent religion, and therefore they're scared about it. They're scared about anything related with Islam. That is the second point. And the third point is it has something to do with the sense of superiority or prejudice of some people. And this kind of problem, I mean, there are certain people who has certain mindset. The sense of, for example, the sense of superiority, or if I use say sociological term, Eurocentrism, for example, meaning that the belief that Europe is the best, Europe is superior. For example, the German people during Hitler's time, they believe that the Aryan people is the most superior race as compared with other races around the world, and therefore anything which actually related to races which is not them, they consider to be inferior, and they have a certain prejudice towards that. So these are among the background that we have in the world today. And then I want to mention one last point. Recently, we can see an upsurge of Islamophobic messages, Islamophobia around the world. Why is this thing happen? I think this is this kind of understanding requires a deeper discussion and analysis that we are going to do after this.
Right. You've presented four important points in this particular part. How, especially when you mentioned about the perception, bad perception, and also half truth, which actually shows the problem of lack of understanding, knowing that brings about fuels Islamophobia. My next question is, what actually fuels Islamophobia? I mean, we've mentioned some of this. You said prejudice, you said the problem of sense of superiority, but are there any other factors that actually makes it worse? I mean, to the extent that whatever that has been done to tackle this particular problem, we know that we have an International Day against Islamophobia. I think the United Nations have actually set this particular day to tackle issues on Islamophobia, and it has been addressed largely in the global context. But what do you think are the problems or other factors actually makes it fuel and is still a problem in many other countries?
I think there are two things that we can highlight here. Maybe there are other factors and variables, but I think there are two important factors. One is internal factors, the other one is the external factors. When we talk about internal factors, we are talking about the internally driven or the existence of extremism, radicalization, and violent extremism that existed in Muslim communities, in the Muslim countries. There are certain ideologies, for example, the ideology promoted by ISIS, promoted by Al-Qaeda, or promoted by other radical group. The existence of this group and the promotion of their ideology is actually portraying or created a certain image about Islam. Imagine this group, for example, ISIS and Al-Qaeda is not a Muslim group, but it is a Hindu group or the Buddhist group. What do you think the Muslim would feel about Hinduism and Buddhism? Imagine that is change.
Yeah.
The one that is committed by ISIS is committed by the Hindus. I mean, I'm not saying the Hindus are like that, but imagine for a second the hypothetical example. So that is how the perception is made, or the perception is formed, because the existence of such group in our community, and therefore we have this kind of perception. We have this kind of Islamophobic understanding, Islamophobic perception toward Muslim, toward Islam, toward anything which is related to Muslim and Islam. That is internal part of it. And now we talk about the external part of it. There are perception by the non-Muslim toward Islam because of the existence of or the presence of certain extremism or the violent things in the Muslim community. Definitely they have a certain perception. And this perception is solidified even further with the presence of, for example, with the presence of Muslim in the West. There are migration of Muslim from Muslim countries. They migrated to the West in the mass big amount of people, large quantity of people coming to Europe by a million, by 100,000. They stay in the center of Europe. They spread across Europe, bringing with them certain cultures, certain ideologies, certain beliefs, certain experience, which is actually alien to the West. These are the refugees. And this refugee happened is because of the conflict in Middle East, which is partially created by the powers which is actually existed outside Middle East, with the collaboration with the people or with the government, with the state in Middle East, for example, in the case of Syria. The problem is created inside there, the people flowing out, they travel to Europe. And then the external part of it also because of the role of the media, amplifying this image, fortify this image, reinforcing the image. And therefore, that would actually form this perception. I'm going to tell you more. Actually, it is not just this internal and external factors. There are a few dimensions towards that. There are a few aspects that we can actually discuss further.
You've said this internal and external factors. Muslims, for example, what more can Muslims do? I mean, we know that we should disassociate the followers of the religion, their actions. You talked about ISIS and about Al-Qaeda. It's actually actions of individuals. And under the name of religion that brought about this, episodes of Islamophobia, the prejudice against the religion because of individuals. What can be done further by Muslims to make it clear that Islam is different? Islam is about peace. Islam is about, having this, the right understanding of Islam is important. So what can Muslims do?
Well, I think before we go to that, maybe we can discuss a little bit deeper. I mentioned to you just now about two factors, internal factors, the presence of the extremist group inside Muslim community and the perception being created because of that among the Westerners, among non-Muslim, for example. If we will look at further, if we look at deeper, then we can find actually worst kind of form of Islamophobic things, Islamophobia that existed in our community, in our in this world today. I want to mention there are five dimensions of Islamophobia that existed, not only here in Malaysia but also around the world. We can see number one, for example, religious Islamophobia. Islamophobia because they're afraid, they are scared of Islam itself. So I call this religious Islamophobia or Islamophobic. There are certain messages made against Islam, against religion itself. They're targeting Islam, the burning of the Quran. I mean, they make joke about the Prophet, and then they say a lot of bad things about Islam. That's number one. Number two, the political Islamophobia is actually related to Islamophobic messages against anything related to politics related to Muslim and Islam. For example, Islamic parties, Islamic system, or the Muslim politician, they portray a certain image that anything related to uh, political aspect of Islam is negative. They portray that image. They paint this image. This is, I call this political Islamophobia, or the Islamophobic messages related to politics. We also
Yeah.
can see sometimes it is also combined with religious Islamophobia. And number three is social Islamophobia. I mean, they're scared about hijab in France. This is
Yeah.
Islam. This is a social things, but it also has the element of religion there, definitely. But it's
Yeah.
actually what they scared is not about religion itself, but it's a symbol related to Islam. Hijab, and then the beard, the turban, the Muslim dresses, Muslim symbol, the flag, or the crescent, anything related to Islam. Bernard Lewis, for example, wrote a book, What Went Wrong. He refers to Islam, and then he put it in on his book, the crescents, the symbol of crescent on the top of the dome of mosque. This is a kind of a social, cultural Islamophobia. I think people talk about the presence of the green wave. People make use of the third green wave in order to scare people. That is not only to scare people politically, but also to scare people religiously and socially. So that these are the messages. I mean, a very, very subtle message, but it has certain social aspect or social element to that. But it is associated or related to Islamophobia. And the other one is the economic Islamophobia. Islamic economy, for example, which has been around for so many years, is portrayed negatively. I mean, even though it is rarely associated, but if you go to the West, that you talk about Islamic bank, they're going to get scared. They say that is this kind of bank which is going to promote terrorism. So anything which is related to Islam is viewed negatively, even though it is whatever aspect of it, including economic aspect of it, they have a suspicious towards that. And I want to mention the last one, which is actually a very, very effective in order to subvert certain mind to see Islam negatively. That is epistemological Islamophobia. Existed in literature, existed in books, journals, anything which is actually written by Orientalists. They're going to portray image, certain image. They're going to portray Islam. They're going to portray Muslim in certain way, under a certain light, based on their interpretation. And they keep repeating these messages again and again and again. So it is going to be well-established premises, intellectual premises. And people are going to be using that framework, that kind of understanding in order to, for example, to analyze issues on Muslim, in order to view Muslim, or in order to view issues related to Muslim. For example, they even use the term Muhammadan or Muhammadain. The Orientalists was using this. And then the term terrorism, it is associated with Islam. And then they describe Muslim as in certain manner. And they're going to explain certain symbol in certain manner. So these actually constitute the epistemological dimension of Islamophobia. And it is embedded subtly in our discourse, in many books written by certain scholars. So these are among the problems that we have to face and that we have to acknowledge before we proceed to deal with it.
Interestingly, what you have mentioned, I think it has to be well explained to the audience, especially when we talk about the factors of Islamophobia. You talked about also, you've mentioned about Malaysia also being there are issues of Islamophobia. Do you think Islamophobia exists in Malaysia? I mean, we are a Muslim majority country, and if it does, in what form does it exist? I think not just Malaysia, in most Muslim majority countries, where the population, like for example in Malaysia, is about 60%. In other countries, there are about 90%, 70%, 80% of Muslims. Do you think in these Muslim majority countries, Islamophobia exists, and in what form, if it does?
In my view, Islamophobia doesn't know location, doesn't know geographical location, doesn't know races, doesn't know time. We have seen the phenomena of Islamophobia has taken place for ages. In any societies, in any places, we will find one. In the context of Malaysia as well, we can see the phenomena of Islamophobia also existed in our society, not only among non-Muslim, but also among Muslims too. I
Yeah.
mean, there are certain people who has unnecessary, unfounded fear of Islam. Maybe because they don't understand about it, maybe because they have bad experience with Muslim and Islam in the past. Therefore, it formed their perception. So this is the fact that we have to accept that even though Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, but the phenomena of Islamophobia also existed in our society, and we have to deal with it. And you asked just now about in what form that it has existed. Earlier, I provided the framework to analyze this issue. That is religious
Yeah.
aspect of it. Do we have the religious Islamophobia in Malaysia? Of course, there are certain people, for example, who are actually afraid of Islam unnecessarily because they have a wrong understanding about what Islam is. They have a bad experience with certain Muslim people in the past, and therefore they blame Islam for this. There are people. It's also among non-Muslims. It also happen among Muslims too. And then
Yeah.
I may also mention about political Islamophobia. People talk about green wave. People talk about we are afraid of extremism coming over to Malaysia. Whose narrative is this? Where we get this narrative? And who actually put this narrative into the media? There are certain people who try to portray certain type of group with this kind of image,
Yeah.
even though it is not a fact, but you can create perception based on the simple thing that you can find. You can create that image. And then also political, we have the social aspect of it that I said, but maybe right now we do not have the problem like what the Muslim experience in France. People are afraid of hijab. I think here we don't have a problem with that, and we don't have so much problem with that. And in the case of economy, we do not have any problem with the economic Islamophobia. But I think that the problem is we still have is at least there are three problems: religious, political, and epistemological Islamophobia. There are still certain discourse about Islam. It is not correct, and we have to rectify that, including in Malaysia. There are studies done by Dr. Murni Wan Muhammad Noor,
Yeah.
UPM, about the existence of Islamophobic messages in the media. She has done a study about that. She confirmed that there are certain media has portrayed interpret or portray the image of Islam negatively, meaning that when we talk about Islam, it's going to use certain adjective to explain that Islam is in negative light. So even though we are Muslim majority country, but this is a persistent problem that we have to deal with it, and we need a strategy, a long-term strategy, how to counter this.
Interestingly, when you say that we need long-term strategy, maybe as a conclusion to the first part of our conversation on understanding Islamophobia in the West, what do you think immediate strategy that can be adopted for us to combat issues of Islamophobia? We don't have to look it further, but we can actually look in the context of Malaysia, for example. You say there are problems of Islamophobia in the country. We just want to understand, have we not done enough to explain about Islam in its truest sense, in the correct and to correct the understanding of Islam? So what is a kind of immediate strategy that you think is important for us to approach or to take this as an immediate approach, Dr. Ahmad, as a conclusion to our conversation this evening?
My conclusion is very simple. The job to combat Islamophobia is everybody's job. Every individual, every Muslim individual need to take up the responsibility of correcting the wrong image of Islam.
Yeah.
By showing them, by telling them the true image of Islam. Actually, that is the essence of da'wah. I try to think about, is there any other way that we can use in order to combat Islamophobia, in order to deal with the problem of Islamophobia? I find none other than returning or activating an active da'wah. An active da'wah means that every individual Muslim need to take up the responsibility of explaining to the people. I mean, if you're an individual, you play that responsibility. If you are an organization, I think IKIM is doing it right now, just to use the platform that we have in order to explain to the people that the image that being portrayed, that you've seen in the media or what other people say, is not accurate. The true teaching of Islam is actually, Islam calls for peace. Islam calls for coexistence. But it is not actually to explain about the perception which is wrong. We also need to put forward or to promote certain concepts, certain approaches. For example, wasatiyah. The current government right now is talking about the Madani approach. We also can put forward, we can promote the Madani approach. We can promote peaceful coexistence. We can promote the idea of fiqh aqalliyat, for example, fiqh al-awlawiyat, and then wasatiyah. Before this, we have Islam Hadari. So all this kind of idea actually need to be promoted in society, so that we not only combat, but we also provide alternative. I think that is the best approach that we can take. Besides, we also need to keep in mind that the Quran has laid down the foundation, the framework of da'wah. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah, by wisdom, judicious approach, wal mau'izatul hasanah, by dialogue, wajadilhum billati hi ahsan, by debates, by argument. So I think that we can use this in stages. But most importantly, we have to understand judicious approach. What is the best way that we can deal with it according to the context of time, context of place, of people, so that it is produce effective result.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad. I think that is a very, I think, direct and also suitable conclusion to our first part of the conversation this evening on understanding Islamophobia in the West. You've mentioned about how it does exist in Malaysia, and how we as Muslims, we have roles to play, and da'wah is the approach where we can actually look at for us to combat Islamophobia in the context of Malaysia. And with that, Dr. Ahmad, I thank you, and inshallah, we'll talk to you again on the second part of this conversation, inshallah. And with that, I thank you, my producer, Ms. Batrisyia, Afrina, Yusri, who are with us and helping us with the technical part of this conversation. Hope to, for our fellow listeners to be with us again, inshallah, next week in another episode of Open Forum. With that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum.